Ladies and gentlemen, if I could grab your attention back, please. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could please introduce our panel, and then we're going to jump into a discussion. A couple of things I want to say to you is today's being filmed, so we can capture the content and hand it over to the Yes 23 campaign. You do have the ability to ask questions. So on the back of your lanyards, you'll find a QR code. You can scan that code, it'll take you to Slido. You can ask any question you want anonymously, and those questions will be relayed to me and I can put them to the panel. There are no media present, but I believe there are some media owners present. Let me properly introduce our guests because we are absolutely thrilled that both Noel and Allegra have given up their mornings for us. So Noel comes from the southeastern Cape and York Peninsula. He's a Gugu Yimida man. He's one of Australia's most influential Indigenous lawyers, activists, and has campaigned tirelessly on behalf of Aboriginal people for a lifetime. He's the founder of the Cape York Institute for Policy and Leadership. He's also an advisor for the Cape York Partnership and chairman of Good to Great Schools Australia. He's been involved in many land rights fights and was part of the Indigenous negotiation team for the drafting of the Native Title Act in 1993, where he would have worked with our good friend Aidan Ridgway. Noel was a member of the expert panel on constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians and is currently a member of the First Nations Referendum Working Group, which advised the government on the wording of the constitutional amendment, the question and the principles of the voice. So you can say he's been there at the coalface of this monumental change. Now, Noel has been travelling relentlessly, first to help shape the voice, to establish parliamentary support for a referendum, and now to campaign for a Yes campaign. He's been in 4 states in the last 3 days, speeches, media appearances, community meetings, campaign planning. Noel, we know this takes a toll on mind and body, so we're really, really grateful you could fit us into your schedule this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Noel Pearson. Now, Allegra Spender, next to me, is the Member of Parliament for the federal seat of Wentworth, and you're my local MP.
Excellent.
Allegra is part of the teal wave that swept into the Parliament in 2022. Wentworth covers the Eastern Beaches, and it was a seat that was once held by Malcolm Turnbull and John Hewson. Prior to politics, Allegra was a business analyst at McKinsey's, was a policy analyst to the UK Treasury, and has been involved in a number of senior business leadership positions, including the family fashion business, Carlos Ampati. Allegra's established a group in the electorate of Wentworth called the Voice for Wentworth to coordinate volunteering as well. Welcome.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask some questions to get things rolling, and first to Noel. It's been 15 years, as you famously said, 5 governments, 6 prime ministers to get the promise of a recognition referendum off the ground. How do you and your fellow Voice campaigners keep the faith?
Because we're in the final stretch. We've kept the concept alive over 15 years. At every turn, we've kept our eyes on the outcome we want. And even though there's been valleys of fear and despair, we've kept the faith, and we're now basically 6 weeks out from the referendum that we've been seeking. We wanted this thing to be put to the Australian people. We think the Australian people are different from our politicians, and our challenge was to get the referendum question passed by Parliament, and that has happened, and we're now out in the open. We've got 17.5 million Australians to talk to, and we think that in this final 6 weeks, I'm sensing a mood swing and a momentum change in favour of our campaign. And so it's been hard to keep the faith, but extremely optimistic that we will get there with the support of an organised campaign. We need Australians of goodwill to step up and contribute. Good things just don't happen just by watching it on TV or listening to the radio. Good people have got to step up to make good things happen. So every week we're seeking more and more volunteers. We're already at the 30,000 mark, which is the largest mobilisation of any political campaign in the history of the country. But every week we want that number to grow, and we want to leave no stone unturned. We want to make sure that on October the 14th we get the result that the country deserves, the country needs, and I'm pretty confident at this stage. It was exhilarating yesterday to have the date announced by the Prime Minister. And so the morning after, I'm feeling very optimistic.
I'm going to ask you both this question, but firstly, Allegra, you've been out campaigning. What's the case you present for the voice that has the most traction?
I think that that it is a simple proposal and it's modest, because I think there's a lot of misinformation about that, and saying that it has a simple proposal, that has a modest proposal that can make a practical difference to the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I think that's the heart of it. And I think that's the heart of it because I think Australian people really want everyone in this country to thrive. I think there's enormous goodwill there. And I think it's making, I think the practical case that by listening to people, trying to understand what is important to them, what they think will make the difference, that is the greatest chance we have to both close the gap, but actually live, as a country where we celebrate and embrace Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture more wholly in this country. So I think that it's simple, that it's about listening, and that it can make a practical difference to people's lives. Those are some of the things I think people, that's why I support it, and it's certainly, I think, why a lot of Australians will support it. But Noel, you know, you know this much better than me. Tell me, what's your...
Yeah, I mean, it's crucial. If we're going to make progress for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we're probably the most advantaged country on earth. We're up there with the most advantaged country on earth. And yet we have the most disadvantaged Indigenous population. You've got to go to sub-Saharan Africa to find numbers like ours. Life expectancy, health, education outcomes. And there's no country that jails a greater percentage of a people than it jails us. Children in out-of-home care in Queensland, my home state, is about to surpass 50%. And that's 4% of the population contributing 50% of the children in out-of-home care. It's an absolute crisis, and it's been going on for a long time. The government has shown that it does not have the solutions for these problems, and it's about time that we give power and responsibility to Indigenous people to determine those things that are going to be effective in terms of turning this crisis around. Everybody needs self-determination to succeed. You need it. You've had it all your lives. You've built your capabilities and power because you've self-determined your own path. Well, we need self-determination for our people to take power, to take responsibility, and ultimately, if things are not turning around, we're going to have skin in the game. We're actually going to have to account for that. And when we account for that, we will have much more effective policies, I think. Certainly my work in Cape York Peninsula has been dedicated towards trying to empower our people to take their place in the country, to take their fair share of the country. And there's certain things we need to do to Children need to grow up in loving families, in good homes, with access to good education and good health services. You know, it's not much more than that. You put those things together and in 12 years, bang, the trajectory for the children is completely different from their parents. So we can and we will do this, but the Voice, I can tell you, is a major reform that will help us do the practical stuff on the ground.
And I just want to add an example. We had in Parliament recently the land councils from the Northern Territory, all of them in Parliament supporting the Voice. And I asked them, why do you support the Voice? And they said, look, you look at interventions, things like the federal government intervention in the Northern Territory, said, we were not consulted. You know, we did not have a voice in terms of the, you know, how and what was done to our people in this situation. And, you know, and so federal government sometimes, you know, does that. But if you aren't listening to the people who, you know, you are, you know, I think with goodwill trying to help, then so often you get it wrong. And you see that in your own life, you can see that everywhere. And I think it's absolutely true for how we as a country work and with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brethren, brothers and sisters. And, you know, I think it's, you know, I think the worst statistic I heard in terms of disadvantage was, I think, one that the Prime Minister has spoken a couple of times about, saying a young Aboriginal man is more likely to go to jail than to go to university. And I'm going, you know, we are a lucky, lucky, lucky country, but we're broken in some ways, and this has got to be our chance to fix it.
Thank you. Noel, at Gama, you told the story about rheumatic heart disease. So if we want to think of an example of practical change that the Voice might give, could you retell that story?
Okay, we don't exactly know, but there's at least a couple of people whose heart is compromised every week, and they die in their teens, in their 20s, because they contracted a very mild fever called rheumatic heart fever, and it results in a disease that can't be cured, but can only be managed from that point onwards. When I go to schools in Cape York, we go to the staff room and they've got the photos of the kids with the condition, because we have to be very vigilant about their care. Rheumatic heart disease has been eradicated all around the world, including amongst white Australians early in the 20th century. Bangladesh, India are places with high concentrations of RHD. Remote Indigenous Australia is also a place where RHD is very prominent. I looked at the Hansard speeches of Warren Edge, our local member. He's been our local member in Cape York for 26 years. And we type in RHD or rheumatic heart disease, he has not once spoken about it. He has not once brought it to the attention of the Parliament or the government. And that's after 26 years. He made his first mention of it the week after Gama. We need a voice to bring these issues to the attention of the government and the Parliament, because these are eradicable diseases. If we put a concerted effort in as a partnership between communities, because the issues driving it are hygiene, overcrowding, and acute medical care for children who contract the disease. This is just one of a raft of issues that we need to attend to with great urgency and resolve. And the Voice, I think, will be relentless in terms of presenting these issues so that they're not neglected, they're not left in the too hard basket, but instead we start to eradicate these diseases, one disease at a time.
Thank you. Can I just turn the conversation to the politics, the mucky business of winning a vote? Noel, what's your response when people say, but Aboriginal people are divided on the Voice?
We've been tracking the polling for 5 years in the wider community and specifically Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. The support amongst our people has never been less than 80%. And it remains that today. The great majority of people, even people who haven't really heard much about the Voice, when it's explained to them, obviously ours is the one community that is at the highest level of support. And yes, there's people on the hard left and the hard right that are opposed, but the great mass of our people are in support of this.
Allegra, much has been made that this is a divisive question. How does it feel in your electorate? Do you think it's divisive? And if it is, why?
I think politics has tried to make it as divisive as possible, and I think there are people who should be taking responsibility for that, to be honest. But I don't find it generally divisive in my electorate, and I also think we need to work really hard to make sure it's not divisive. And, for me, the big approach on this is to say, the approach I try and take is to say, look, I'm very supportive of the yes, and these are the reasons why I'll be voting yes while I'm campaigning yes. But at the same time, the biggest thing I ask every person in my electorate is get informed, because this has a chance to make a really big difference to some people's lives. And so it is, as Australians, as responsible voters, take that responsibility seriously and get informed, and you will make your decision. So I think that's really got to be the way to approach this. And then you see some things that people have called each other and done, it's not helpful, and in some cases it's absolutely offensive. But I think what we just need to do is stay respectful, stay really positive, remember what is the reason we're trying to do this, and this is actually move our country forward, and let's get really informed. And I think that's really the message I try and take out, and I think that's the message that we really need for the next 6 weeks, personally.
This might be a slightly divisive question. Noel, what do you think the ultimate motivation is for those funding the No campaign, and who are they?
Every great reform has its detractors. Women's suffrage had it in the 1890s. There was a No campaign against women's suffrage in South Australia. And if South Australia didn't vote yes, then all of the other states in Australia wouldn't have had an example to follow, and all of the other nations around the world would not have had South Australia's example. It takes a good yes majority to lead everybody else. And there's also the old Machiavelli saying about, every reform is like a lonely child. You look around for the support, and how many people are going to join you in the struggle, including people who will benefit from the reform. You will have lukewarm supporters. Actually, the great thing about our Yes campaign is that many, many Australians are putting their hands up to lead this reform for Australia. It's the No campaign. There was a No campaign to federation. We had to have 3 referenda leading up to 1901. Queensland and Western Australia stayed out of the first one. It took 3 goes to bring Australia together. And yet who in the wake of that kind of thought Australia was such a bad idea? So anything like this is always subject to contrary views. The important thing is that Australians consider whether maintaining the status quo in relation to Indigenous people is good enough. And my view is that maintaining the status quo won't be just maintaining it, it will be a regression. I think very hard and long about pathways to the kind of future I want for my people, and I just can't see a pathway after no. This has been a pathway that we've been thinking about for a long time, we've been working towards, we've been building empowerment from the ground up. And we're having tremendous success when we do it. When our ideas prevail, our children get healthier, educated, and we work out solutions for them to become modern versions of themselves. That's our goal in traditional communities. We want our people to become modern version of ourselves, not somebody else's vision for what we should be. Because in the past, that vision was always, well, why don't you just shed your culture and your languages and your relationship with your country and become exactly like us? And that has been the story for 2 centuries. With recognition comes the recognition of our right to be ourselves and to determine how we fit into the modern world. And of course, the vision generally is that we want our children to walk in 2 worlds. We want them to have the capabilities to have the best of both. And that's a vision that recognition will allow us to realise for the first time. For the first time, there'll be a kind of ability for us to determine our own road in terms of how we integrate and fit into modern Australia. And we'll get better results when we do that.
Thank you. Lucy, do we have any questions coming in from the floor?
We do. Noel, can you please explain the concept of makarata and how it's relevant in the voice and understanding voice treaty truth?
Well, obviously in this campaign, we're concentrating on the voice, right? We're trying to amend the Australian Constitution to recognise Indigenous peoples, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as the first peoples of Australia. So that's what the clause says. In recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first peoples of Australia. And then there's a guarantee that there shall be a body called the Voice. There shall be a body to be called the Voice. And the function of the Voice to provide advice to the Commonwealth Parliament and Government, and the details are furnished by the Parliament. Because the clause says the Parliament shall have power to make laws in relation to the composition, functions, powers and procedures. See, I've got it all wrote. But in relation to the truth and treaty aspects, the makarata aspects, that's like the Voice, we're going to have to advocate that. And the Australian, we'll have to go through a process with the Parliament and the Government. The crucial first step is the Voice. And it's like, please don't ask me to conquer K2 while we're trying to conquer Everest. We need a majority of voters in a majority of states. That's a massive challenge. A majority of voters in a majority of the states. It's one of the hardest constitutions in the world to change. And these simple words of recognition, which when I explain it to Australians, when I go around the countryside, they say, fair enough. It's the statement of the obvious, that the Indigenous people were the first peoples of Australia. But the Constitution is a heavy-duty document, and every word is the subject of weighty consideration. That's why the bar is so high. I think that if you're talking to friends, colleagues, family, returning to the words that are proposed in the referendum question is really the best pedagogy for this. It is really the best way of explaining what we're doing on October the 14th. And we should spend the next 6 weeks talking about the provision and asking the question, well, Had we turned up here in 1788 in this harbour, and this was the deal, who would have said no to that? And this late in our history, essentially that is what we're doing. And I just cannot understand how we could be truculent about that.
Thank you. And the card that Noel is waving around there, I might get him to wave it again, if he could. I'll wave. These are like little conversation cards that we should probably have all in our wallet. So if you run into a neighbour or anyone, the barman, you can whip this out. Here's the words, here's some talking points. There's a box of them just here for when you leave. Allegra, in the marriage equality debate, a lot of big brands, a lot of corporate leaders were very, very vocal and really threw their weight behind the campaign. This voice campaign, yes and no, a little bit patchy. What's your assessment of corporate Australia's attitude to this? And should the brands, the media owners, the marketing advisors here today, what more should they be doing to support the voice in the next 6 weeks?
I think this is actually a great opportunity for corporate Australia to speak up. And the reason why I think, we were just having this conversation actually at the table earlier, the reason why I think it is important is like companies have a different view to individuals. You know, companies often deal with government, they deal with different parts of the country, they have some, in many cases, a broader view. And I think that it's appropriate, therefore, for companies to say, well, if in our corporate knowledge we reflect that our country would be better for the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to have a voice, then companies should stand up for that. And I think in many cases, you know, corporates would say, yes, that's absolutely right, because if you have worked in, you know, in Australia and you know, worked across all the different sorts of issues, I think, you know, a corporate can have a view on that, and if you have a view, you should stand up for it. I also think, you know, the way to do this also, for those, you know, some people are being cautious about this, and I think, again, it comes back to having respectful conversations. It's saying, you know, as a company, this is why we support it. This is the decision we have made and why we think it's important. And what we are advocating for is for our staff, our customers, our suppliers to get informed. And I think there's great ways, you know, corporate Australia, you know, employs, you know, a vast number of people in this country who are going to vote at the referendum. And so at the very least, I think corporate Australia has the opportunity to help people, you know, get informed. Because I think, you know, once you get informed, once you really consider you know, what is being asked of the Australian people, I think it's a much simpler question than I think it's been put in the media. So I think that's a great opportunity. You know, I'm proud that corporate Australia led on marriage equality. I think it was absolutely the right thing to do, and it has brought our country together better. And I think this is the opportunity for corporate Australia to do the same thing on The Voice. And so I know so many of you, you know, have that opportunity. And you've also got enormous creative outlets. I mean, I know in this room, like the people who, you know, the imagination, the creativity, the expertise you have in getting messages out to people is enormous. And so you're very influential. And so for me, I'm saying, look, you're influential. Please use that power, you know, personally, as a business, in lots of different ways to get this done.
Thank you. We've got time for one more question from the floor.
We have a few questions, so apologies that we won't be able to get to them all. Just one that might not have been covered yet. What do we do if Australia votes no?
Oh, it's a really hard question. And I've, you know, I mean, Noel, you know, it's a really, really hard question. I think this is going to need enormous soul searching. If we vote no. I've got Jean, one of my local Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who has been leading from in our community and saying it will be really hard. I mean, as a non-Indigenous person, I think, you know, I will be very sad, and I think we will have a lot of soul searching, to be honest, as a country, and I think we will be in some ways a bit lost because this is a unique opportunity, and if we vote no, that is voting no, I think, to a unique opportunity. So it's going to be tough, I'll be honest. I think it's going to be very hard.
Yeah. As I said earlier, I can't see a positive pathway forward from no. I think that those who are confused by the idea of a progressive no are kidding themselves. If we don't get this, we're not going to get this.
Yeah, I think that's right.
The next round is going to be this. And that's just the logic of our political situation. It's not as if a second go at this is going to yield something better because we decide to vote with Senator Hanson. It is just, can I use this word, stupidity. There is no progressive no, there's just no. And the second thing is that the idea that we should genuinely try to forge a conciliation will be lost. Basically, people like me who advocate the hard search for common ground will be discredited. We will have spent a long, long time trying to forge that ground, and we will have been shown to have failed. And you might think, well, the country can tolerate that. We can just go on neglecting what's happening and not make any progress in closing the gap and won't affect us. That's possibly one way of dealing with it. But a no outcome would be very bad. I just want to say, Tim, that of course there's you guys, I am supplicant to you, I'm beseeching you to recognise us. Because you have the power, and the power is in the democracy, and we want a place in it. But there's another way of looking at it, which is, shouldn't you be recognised by us? And why is it that we need to be recognised by you? There's the flip side of recognition is us recognising you. And I dare say you have need of it. And that's a question about identity, and that's a question about the spirit of the country. It's not about power, not about democracy, but it is about our identity, who we are as Australians. And that's the unofficial flip side of this recognition. Yes, we are talking about the democracy on October the 14th. We're talking about including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander in the most basic democratic instrument we have, the Constitution. But the reverse of the recognition is necessarily an issue as well. The reverse of the recognition is that we recognise Australia as having these three narratives or three stories: the Indigenous story, the British democracy story, and the multicultural unity story. I think that's the most important thing we need to achieve out of this, a new sense of who we are. You know, our default idea is, oh, there's a bunch of settlers and they're white, and then there's a bunch of natives somewhere in Arnhem Land or Cape York, and in the shadows of our towns and cities. I don't know where we fit the multiculture. Are they settlers? Do they line up behind the Anglos? Our idea of Australia needs replacement. We need to move on to a new idea of Australia, and that has those three stories. Migrants aren't a kind of third variety of Australians. Indigenous foundations, British democracy, multicultural unity. Those are the three stories of modern Australia. And I hope when we do the first bit that's missing at the moment, the Indigenous recognition, when we do that, the whole story comes together. And we really understand who we are as Australians.
Thank you.
Thank you, Noel.
Well done.
I think you've answered this question, but I'm going to ask first Allegra, then yourself, Noel. This is our wrap-up question. What sort of Australia will we have when The Voice is successful?
Look, I don't think I can top your words, Noel. I think, and I think that the description of those three parts of Australia, to me, are absolutely the heart of who we would like to be, but who we are still not quite yet. And I think this is part of the question of what is in front of us, because we have the gift in this country of the longest continuous civilization, and it is a gift I do not think that we have properly appreciated or embraced. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to internalise that as Australians and feel that that gift is ours to share. We have the gift of British institutions. We are very lucky for the democracy. And we are the most successful multicultural country in the world, except in how we work with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. That is the piece that is missing in this country. And so for me, if we can do this, and I believe absolutely we can, then we can bring those three parts of our country together. And I think it's a very, very exciting place to be, and a very whole expression of this country that reflects, I think, all of us. And I think that's really what I'm seeking, and that's why I support The Voice.
Noel, the last word.
I think I think prejudice is going to diminish. I mean, how diminished is it in relation to same-sex couples
That's all right.
today compared to what it was? The antipathy has gone out and the love has come in. And I think the same thing will happen with our people. I think a lot of prejudice directed at my people, yes, there's the old kind of, they are not fully human, they're subhuman. That's the old racism. There's remnants of that, but that is not the main driver. I think the main driver is uncertainty about how to deal with Indigenous people in our sense of being Australian. That uncertainty about how to place Indigenous people in the idea of Australia that we cherish and that we so desperately want to feel good about is the driver of the fear, driver of the prejudice, and I think we will come through the other side of that. Once we have a sense of recognition of each other, that will diminish, in my view. Too much of what I see in the No campaign is a betrayal of this fear. Why do they fear us? They never meet us. We've never been in their homes. I can't even work out what wrong we've done to them. And so when we get this recognition right, and we're all confident about our own identities and how we fit in with each other, I think we're going to make we're going to make a lot of progress in terms of improving the attitude towards our people. I said at at the beginning of this campaign, we are a very much unloved people. And I struggle to find any community in the country as poorly regarded as ours. And I just can't understand, well, I do understand it, but we're only 3% of the country. Most people have never had an Indigenous person come to dinner in their homes. And yet there's such strong feelings in many quarters of the country. So we've got to get this right. We can't muck about. We've got to get this right. We've got 6 weeks to do it. You've got to take responsibility for this. This is your country. This is your constitution. Don't leave it to me. Yeah? I'm 3%. I can only marshal 3% of the population in the vote. You guys are 97%. It's your constitution. So we need to mobilise. And every Australian citizen needs to take responsibility for getting a successful outcome in October.
Here.
Here. Ladies and gentlemen, please thank our guest, Noel Pearson, Allegra Spender, MP.